The irony. While he mocked me for not holding company shares, investors were calling me, directly offering partnerships because my numbers were real, not smoke and mirrors. The ascent was quiet but deliberate, and it terrified my brother. He didn't know it yet, but the empire he dismissed as a hobby was growing into something Forbes would soon put on its cover. Moving from my cramped Brooklyn apartment to a sleek office in Lower Manhattan felt like crossing an invisible threshold. I still remember the first time I stepped into that space, sunlight spilling across polished concrete floors, glass walls revealing the jagged beauty of the skyline, the hum of potential vibrating in every corner. My old wooden desk, scarred from years of cheap wine rings and frantic scribbles, was replaced by a 12-seat conference table that gleamed under recessed lighting. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I hadn't just upgraded offices. I'd crossed into a different league. One by one, I built a team. An analyst named Priya, who'd left Goldman Sachs after watching too many of her colleagues burn out chasing phantom shares. An accountant, Daniel, who could spot fraudulent reporting in a heartbeat. A quiet but brilliant operations manager named Mariah, who kept our growing projects from unraveling. I hired them not because of pedigree, but because they believed in building something real. Together, we transformed Nexus Revive into more than a consultancy, it was a movement. Our track record spoke louder than any advertisement. Romano's Trattoria had become a case study in survival. Tony's Steakhouse, once hemorrhaging cash, now boasted a wait list on weekends. The Lebanese bakery that nearly shuttered had expanded into catering, hiring 6 more employees. A small Asian fusion spot in Harlem reinvented itself into a neighborhood favorite after we streamlined its menu and built a delivery system. Over 18 months, Nexus Revive had saved over 200 jobs. We didn't rely on glossy ads or billboards. Word of mouth was our currency. Business owners whispered my name across boroughs like a secret weapon. Call Elena, she'll save you. That reputation carried further than I could have imagined. Soon it wasn't just restaurants calling me. A distressed manufacturing plant in New Jersey reached out, their wood furniture business collapsing under bloated costs and outdated contracts. Traditional consulting firms had quoted them $400,000 just to assess the situation. I charged a third of that, and I delivered results. I negotiated with unions to avoid strikes, restructured logistics routes, and saved the company $200,000 a month. By the end of the year, the factory was not only solvent, but expanding production lines. Every victory sharpened me. I wasn't just a businesswoman anymore. I was a force reshaping the lives of families who depended on paychecks, a strategist turning despair into profit. And yet in my own family, I remained invisible. At family dinners, Victor dominated conversations with talk of shares and hedge positions. One evening, as we sat beneath a chandelier that probably cost more than my first year's revenue, he smirked across the table and said, "Our portfolio's up 20% this quarter." Not bad, right? His friends nodded, impressed. Then someone asked me politely, "And what do you do?" Elena, Victor laughed before I could open my mouth. "She helps mom-and-pop diners keep the lights on. Cute little side projects." The guests chuckled, eyes sliding past me as if I were less than the help. My mother clinked her glass, steering the conversation elsewhere, pretending she hadn't heard the cruelty. I stayed silent, my fork poised above the plate. Inside, I thought, keep laughing. My clients pay invoices your LPs could only dream of. The contrast was almost theatrical. His hedge fund games were built on speculation, while my restructuring projects were saving livelihoods. He measured worth in stock portfolios. I measured it in jobs preserved, futures rebuilt. It wasn't long before the press took notice. A local business magazine ran a feature titled "Brooklyn Consultant Rescues Main Street." They wanted me on the cover, but I declined, still wary of the spotlight. I wasn't ready to announce myself, not yet. Timing was everything. The real unveiling would come later, and it would come with far more weight. But Victor could sense something shifting. I noticed subtle changes in his tone, the way he asked questions about which businesses I worked with, the way he dropped names of my clients at dinners as if fishing for information. Through his network of Wall Street friends, he began probing. I could almost smell the envy beneath his polished exterior. He wasn't laughing anymore, he was watching, calculating, planning. And I was ready. In my office drawer sat a folder thicker than any stock report he bragged about. Documentation evidence, every contract, every success story. If he tried to play dirty, if he dared to sabotage me, I had proof strong enough to crush any manipulation. One evening after the team had left, and Manhattan's lights blinked alive outside my glass office, I sat alone at the conference table scrolling through emails. Among the invoices and proposals, one subject line froze me. Forbes inquiry. Would you be open to an interview on self-made entrepreneurs in restructuring? I leaned back in my chair, the skyline glowing like fire beyond the glass. My heart raced, not with fear, but with certainty. This was it. The quiet ascent was about to end. The world would soon know my name. I whispered to myself, steady and sharp, the cover is coming. It wasn't the badge that cut deepest. It was hearing my own brother Victor turn me into a joke in front of people who once respected me. At a private dinner in Tribeca, where crystal glasses sparkled under chandeliers and filet mignon was served rare, he leaned back in his chair and smirked. Elena's just a consultant for failing diners. He told his partners nothing but a glorified housekeeper for businesses already on life support. They laughed, raising their wine glasses like he'd delivered the evening's best punchline. My cheeks burned, but not from shame. At that moment, I remembered the encrypted folder sitting in my office, evidence that could bury him. Victor thought the dinner was his stage. He had no idea it was also his downfall's opening act. The Marcellus Club was Manhattan excess carved into marble. A private dining room where the wealthy performed their own importance beneath gilded chandeliers and walls lined with original Rothkos. Bordeaux vintages were poured as if water Wagyu beef, plated with gold leaf accents, and servers moved in near silence, anticipating every nod. I had been invited, reluctantly an afterthought, wedged into the seating plan at the far edge of Victor's inner circle. The laughter came in waves that night, a chorus of bankers, venture capitalists, and family acquaintances leaning into his performance. She rescues bakeries and taco stands. Victor continued, the smug tilt of his voice carrying across the table. Meanwhile, we're building actual wealth stocks, shares, DeFi funds. He raised his glass again, pausing just long enough for the punchline. She counts receipts. The table erupted. Men in tailored suits smirked behind their napkins. Women draped in diamonds exchanged knowing looks. I kept my expression neutral, swirling the Bordeaux in my glass. Inside, my voice whispered, "Bye. I know more about blockchain adoption than you ever will, Victor. I've implemented decentralized finance solutions in retail chains while you were still Googling the definition." My mother chose that moment to lean forward, lips pursed in feigned regret. She was always the dreamer, she told Victor's guests, her tone light, but sharpened with cruelty. Never the heir. Heads around the table nodded, sympathy laced with amusement. I felt their gazes skim me like a courtroom verdict, unfit, dismissed, irrelevant. I pretended to sip wine, masking the fire boiling beneath my ribs. Their words pulled me backward into memory nights I'd stayed up restructuring Marquez Textiles when the pandemic threatened to close its doors forever. Hundreds of employees had looked to me for answers, while Victor partied in Miami uploading pictures of champagne towers and rented yachts. When the factory survived, when the workers kept their jobs, Victor had taken the credit. He'd stood before cameras declaring it a victory for Navarro Capital. But I remembered every spreadsheet, every call with suppliers, every sleepless dawn. The humiliation tonight wasn't new, it was just louder. What none of them knew was that while Victor flaunted his shares in the family trust, I held something heavier than stock certificates. In my encrypted insurance folder, tucked safely across multiple drives, were files that mapped every fraudulent transfer Victor had ever made. Fake valuations, manipulated investor decks, and wires that rerouted trust funds into private accounts. He thought he was untouchable, but the evidence in my possession could erase his career in a single filing. And then something unexpected shifted. While the others laughed, one man at the table didn't. His eyes, sharp behind understated glasses, lingered on me longer than polite curiosity demanded. Later, after dessert was served and the room thinned, he approached me near the coat check. "Elena, he said quietly, introducing himself as Damien, one of Victor's newer partners. His handshake was firm, but his voice low, almost conspiratorial. I've seen discrepancies in Victor's reports. Numbers that don't add up. If you ever need support, call me. For a moment, I just stared at him. An ally. From Victor's own world. It was the first crack in the fortress my brother had built around himself. I slipped on my coat, clutching the lapels tight, as I stepped into the cold Manhattan night. The city lights glared against the winter air, sharp and unforgiving. Behind me, the last echoes of laughter spilled out of the Marcellus Club, gilded and cruel. As I reached the curb, I caught Victor's voice through the open door, carried on a smug laugh. Just wait until the gala next week, he told a guest. She'll finally learn her place. I stood frozen for a moment, the words slicing colder than the wind. Then I let the door shut behind me, walking toward the waiting car. My thoughts were steady, sharp as glass. You want to teach me my place, Victor, fine. But I'll be the one writing the lesson plan. When I left that Tribeca dinner, the city lights blurred past the taxi window, but my mind was razor sharp. Victor thought he'd humiliated me. What he didn't know was that I had already assembled a quiet army. For 6 months, I'd been collecting receipts, tracing wire transfers, and photographing documents he carelessly left on his desk. His success wasn't built on brilliance, it was built on fraud. And now it was time to weaponize the truth. I opened my encrypted folder labeled Valor because this fight would require courage as much as evidence. That night I made the call to Simone Dubois, my attorney, and Damien, the partner who'd whispered about discrepancies. Their responses told me everything I needed to know. Victor's empire wasn't just vulnerable. It was already crumbling. My apartment in Manhattan no longer felt like a home. It was a war room. The dining table was buried beneath stacks of binders, color-coded files, and encrypted drives labeled with innocuous codes. 3 monitors flickered with spreadsheets, forensic accounting reports, and timelines of transfers Victor had thought would remain hidden. I had mapped his fraud with the precision of a surgeon charting veins before an incision. In the center of the wall above my desk hung the badge from that luxury dinner Housekeeper printed in elegant script. I'd pinned it there as my battle flag, a reminder of the insult that had lit the fuse. Every time I looked up from my work, I saw it staring back at me. Simone arrived first, her heels clicking against the hardwood, her black leather briefcase slamming onto the table like a gavel. A former federal prosecutor turned corporate litigator, Simone was the kind of woman who could strip an executive bare with nothing but a cross-examination and a raised brow. She flipped through the files I laid before her, Victor's falsified stock valuations, expense reports, bloated with personal charges, investor funds, siphoned into shadow accounts. This isn't just misconduct, she said flatly, her French accent curling around each word. This is prison-level fraud. If you go forward, Elena, you don't just end his career. You end him. I didn't flinch. Then let's build the timeline. She outlined it with clinical precision: whistleblower, filing with the SEC asset, freezes through emergency injunctions, clawback actions to recover stolen funds. Each step like a domino perfectly aligned to topple the empire he'd built on deceit. Damien joined us later, slipping into the apartment with the wary glance of a man who knew his career hung in the balance. He wore the uniform of Victor's world-tailored suit, silk tie, but his voice carried something raw when he spoke. I've seen the doctored reports, he confessed, lowering his tone as if the walls might be listening. The numbers Victor presented to partners don't match what the companies report internally. He's been inflating valuations, covering losses with creative accounting. I can leak meeting notes, but you didn't hear that from me. Why, I asked him. His jaw tightened. 2 years ago, I was looking for a partner. Victor sabotaged it, told the board I wasn't ready, that I lacked the polish. He wanted me out of his way. He looked me dead in the eye. So let's just say this isn't only business for me. It's personal. Together we began to build the arsenal. Forged expense accounts were stacked beside photographs of wire transfers. Screenshots of falsified investor decks glowed across my monitors. Each document was a weapon. Each file a loaded round. all of it triple encrypted and backed up in 3 undisclosed locations. Simone leaned back, her eyes scanning the war table. Timing is everything. Do you want maximum impact? File right before the luxury gala. He plans to humiliate you again. I nodded. Good. Then we'll humiliate him first. As if on cue, Priya, my analyst, called in from the office. Her voice crackled through the speakerphone, urgent and breathless. Elena, you need to see this. Victor's been moving funds into new projects. Not hedge funds this time. DeFi tokens. Tokens? I frowned. Yes, fake ones. Rug pulls disguised as innovation. He's creating shell companies minting worthless coins and pitching them to investors as the next big decentralized revolution. If this blows up, it's not just the SEC. It's DOJ territory. The room went still. Even Simone's eyes widened. Victor hadn't just trapped himself in the world of fraudulent shares and manipulated stock. He'd dived headfirst into crypto fraud, where the consequences could cross into federal indictments. I felt something cold settle into my chest. The man who mocked me as a housekeeper had built his empire on illusions, each scheme riskier than the last. My revenge wouldn't just be personal justice, it would be public exposure. I walked to the wall and touched the edge of the badge pinned above the desk. My voice came out steady, calm, almost like a vow. They'll learn what kind of house I really keep. Silence settled over the room, broken only by the hum of the monitors. Simone closed her folder with a sharp snap, her gaze steady. Elena, she said gently, if you choose to do this, there's no way to turn back. Are you ready to expose what your brother has done? I met her eyes calmly. He brought this upon himself, I replied. I'm only bringing what's hidden out into the open. From the moment I first noticed Damien watching me across the ballroom, I sensed something different. Everyone else saw me as invisible, mocked, diminished, stripped of dignity. But his gaze carried recognition, almost like he had seen my steal before. And in a way he had, because 2 years earlier I had saved him, though I never imagined that moment would circle back to this war. I still remember it clearly. His fintech startup had been collapsing under its own weight. I was working out of my cramped Brooklyn studio back then, barely sleeping, running numbers late into the night. Damien was desperate, his company's stock free-falling, investors threatening to dump their shares. 200 employees' livelihoods dangled by a thread. When a mutual contact asked if I'd look at his books, I didn't hesitate. I walked into his office with nothing but my laptop and a battered legal pad. No fanfare, no entourage. Within an hour, I'd uncovered 3 overlapping vendor contracts draining hundreds of thousands a month. He had been surrounded by experts who pitched glossy slides for millions, but no one had cared enough to look beneath the surface. I drew a line through the contracts and told him plainly, "There's your first oxygen mask." Over the next weeks, I tore into his numbers with the same hunger I brought to every rescue. A co-founder had fabricated user metrics with bots. Another had gambled reserves on a shady DeFi token that was about to collapse. I called it out, bracing for backlash, but Damien listened. He acted. And when the market crashed weeks later, his company survived because of those moves. When it was done, I didn't take equity or glory or credit. I walked away with my consulting fee and left him with stability, but I also left him with something else, the knowledge that survival doesn't come from inheritance or polished facades. It comes from grit and truth. Now, years later, he was standing beside me in my Manhattan apartment as Project Valor unfolded across my monitors. Simone laid out the legal traps for Victor, but I kept noticing the way Damien looked at me. Not as a client, not as a partner, but as someone who owed me his loyalty. He leaned forward, voice steady. I've seen you dismantle bigger messes than Victor. This time I'll stand with you. For a moment I studied him, remembering the broken man I once found buried under fraudulent reports and panic calls. He wasn't broken anymore. He was steady, and he had chosen to stand on my side of the line. You know what this means, I said quietly. If you help me, they'll come for you too. His jaw tightened, but his answer carried no hesitation. Then let them. If I had to bet on one person to rise from ashes, I'd bet on you. Then, as if to prove his words, Damien reached into his briefcase and slid a thin folder across the table. The cover sheet bore the Navarro capital crest. "I pulled this from a meeting last week," he said. "Victor's planning a new offshore structure front companies in Singapore and Dubai. He thinks no one's watching. But the trail is sloppy. Too sloppy." Simone's eyes flicked to me sharp with recognition. Evidence this fresh wasn't just useful, it was ammunition. Proof that Victor's fraud wasn't in the past. It was still unfolding. I sat back in silence, the glow of the monitors painting the war room in blue light. My fight wasn't mine alone anymore. I wasn't just the housekeeper turned billionaire. I was a general. And for the first time, I had an ally not only loyal, but actively feeding me the weapons to bring my brother down. The chandeliers blazed above us, refracting light across crystal flutes and polished silver, but all I felt was the weight of eyes. Manhattan's elite had gathered in the Ritz-Carlton ballroom for Victor's victory dinner, a celebration of his firm's latest billion-dollar acquisition. But tonight wasn't just about shares or stock deals. Tonight was about Bloodline's dominance and humiliation. At least that was Victor's plan. My name badge waited at the check-in desk, set aside with cruel precision Elena Housekeeper. I arrived alone, stepping out of the black town car into the bitter winter air. My dress was simple but commanding black silk that clung with understated elegance. Not sequined, not flashy, nothing that screamed wealth. It was the armor of someone who didn't need to shout. As the valet reached for my keys, I caught the murmurs ripple down the line of guests waiting at the entrance. "That's Victor's sister, the housekeeper one." The words slithered through the crowd, disguised as whispers, but sharpened with delight. I walked through the gilded doors as if I hadn't heard. At the check-in table, the staffer hesitated. Her smile faltered, and after a long pause, she reached beneath the counter, pulling out the badge. The word burned across the cardstock housekeeper. She looked at me almost apologetically. But before she could hand it over, my mother appeared in a glittering gown that caught the chandelier light. "Ah, Elena," she said sweetly, her voice pitched just loud enough for those nearby. "They found your badge. I do hope you'll be comfortable in your role tonight." The smirk in her eyes was worse than her words. She wanted witnesses. She wanted my humiliation to be public. I accepted the badge without flinching. They expected me to refuse to protest, to storm away. Instead, I pinned it deliberately to my dress, as though it were a brooch of honor. Around us, cameras clicked. Guests exchanged whispers. To them, this was delicious gossip. To me, it was gasoline poured onto fire. Inside the ballroom, cruelty had been curated like decor. At my assigned table, 8 place settings gleamed, but only 7 chairs had been placed. The missing seat was not an oversight, it was a message. Victor's fiancée leaned toward her friend's sequins, sparkling like broken glass, and said with a laugh, "Some people confuse hobbies with real business." They chuckled, and one man discreetly snapped a photo, already drafting his caption for tomorrow's gossip blogs. I sat with poise, tasting the bitterness in the air. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of senators and hedge fund titans, the faint perfume of truffle risotto, it all blended into a theater of exclusion. Victor's entrance was as always theatrical. 40 minutes late, Armani suit sculpted to his body, champagne flute already in hand. Applause rippled through the room as he basked in the spotlight, shaking hands with old money heirs and political climbers. When at last he reached me, his smile was sharpened to a blade. "Glad you could join us," he said, voice loud enough to carry across the tables. "Every family needs staff support." Laughter rippled obediently around him. I met his gaze, calm, unflinching. Silence, I'd learned, could be deadlier than words. As the night stretched on, the toasts turned into weapons. Victor's friends lifted their glasses to amateur consultants and women who don't know when to quit playing business. Every laugh was a dagger, but I kept stillness carved into my bones. They mistook silence for weakness. They didn't know the dossier rested in my purse, mirrored to regulators with SEC filings already time-stamped. Across the ballroom, Damien caught my eye. His phone rested in his hand, ready. He gave me a subtle nod. The story was primed, the tip was cued. All it required was time. At 8:59, I rose from my table. Chairs scraped softly as heads turned, whispers blooming like wildfire. Is she leaving? Has she finally had enough? At 9:00 sharp, a shout cut through the music. Holy shit! Forbes just dropped. Look at the screen. The projector behind the stage flickered. Navarro Capital's gold crest dissolved into a new image. Gasps tore through the room. There it was, my face full page on the cover of Forbes. The headline blazed, "From housekeeper to self-made billionaire, Elena reshapes the future of business." Glasses froze mid-air. Laughter died on lips. Even the string quartet faltered, bowstrokes suspended in shock. Victor's smile faltered, then vanished completely. I turned toward the stage, each step deliberate, my heels echoing against marble. The humiliation they had planned had just detonated in reverse. This wasn't my funeral. It was my coronation. The ballroom fractured with a single word. Forbes. I felt it before I heard it, the sharp intake of breath, the shift of chairs, the sudden silence that wasn't silence at all, but 1,000 minds calculating at once. The projector above the stage flickered Victor's golden Navarro Capital crest, dissolving into a cover fresh from the digital press. My face. My name. The headline, "Elena the self-made billionaire, cleaning up Wall Street's mess." For years they had called me invisible, irrelevant, a housekeeper at the family's table. Now every chandelier reflected my face 10 stories high, my name heavier than Victor's portfolio, my work undeniable. Phones lit like wildfire across the tables. Screens flashed. Investors scrolled messages, poured through encrypted chats. Bloomberg tickers screamed my name. Twitter was already ablaze. And then Damien's voice, deliberate and sharp as a strike of steel, "She's worth more than Victor." The sentence didn't echo, it detonated. Heads snapped. Conversations broke mid-sentence. Victor's aura collapsed in real time. I looked at him then. My brother's face drained, the smirk gone, his champagne glass trembling just enough to betray him. He forced a laugh, thin, brittle, a mask peeling off. "It's exaggerated," he muttered, voice cracking. "Forbes embellishes." But no one was listening to him anymore. A hedge fund manager leaned across the table, hissing into his phone. "Dump the stock. Pre-market now." A senator's aide scribbled furiously, whispering into her boss's ear, "We need distance publicly immediately." One banker dropped his fork, eyes locked on the screen. "Going to rip us apart if this is true." The shift was visible, almost physical. Power leaves Victor's orbit, flowing toward me because numbers, real numbers, don't lie. I rose slowly. The housekeeper badge, still pinned to my chest, caught the chandelier light, no longer ridiculous, but armor. Each step toward the stage rang clear on marble floors, each one heavier than Victor's entire speech. Guests parted without a word, instinctively clearing a path. The microphone hummed beneath my fingers. My voice cut the silence clean. My brother was right about one thing, I began, eyes sweeping the hall. I am a housekeeper. I clean up messes, corrupt businesses, embezzled funds, false balance sheets. And tonight I'm cleaning up the biggest mess of all. I lifted the envelope from my purse, thick with printed evidence. Project Valor. Months of work distilled into a weapon. These, I said, holding them high, are the complaints already filed with the SEC, detailing stock fraud, embezzlement, manipulated valuations hidden under Navarro Capital. The words weren't metaphors. They were filings, case numbers, legal fact. The projector behind me flickered again. Damien had timed it perfectly. Wire transfers, offshore accounts, Cayman shells, fake quarterly reports. Each document lit up the screen, undeniable, time-stamped, signed. Proof that Victor's empire was not built, it was stolen. The ballroom erupted. Investors clawed for phones. Compliance officers were called mid-dinner. "Those are our funds. She's not bluffing. Jesus Christ. Freeze everything now." One journalist already. Live tweeting shouted over the chaos. SEC sources. Confirm an active probe into Navarro Capital. That was the crack that became an earthquake. I turned my gaze on the crowd, calm in the storm. "You've applauded manipulation for years," I said. "Tonight you applaud accountability, whether you like it or not." Eyes widened, but no one argued. They couldn't. The documents were on the wall, mirrored across servers already in federal inboxes. My insurance policy was detonating in real time. Victor staggered to his feet, words spilling ragged. "This is slander. She's jealous, unstable." His voice broke under the weight of evidence. Not a single partner rose to defend him. Even his fiancée leaned away, fury etched into her face as she hissed, "You hid this from me." I didn't look at her. My eyes stayed on Victor. "You built your kingdom on shadows," I told him. "I built mine on numbers that don't vanish under scrutiny. Tonight the world sees the difference." Gasps rippled again as the screen refreshed Bloomberg Live ticker now flashing in bold red. SEC investigates Navarro Capital assets. Frozen pending review. The air thickened. Futures crashed. Partners bolted for exits, desperate to avoid being photographed inside the implosion. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom, once Victor's stage, had become a courtroom without walls, and the verdict was already written. I reached for the badge. Housekeeper. I unpinned it slowly, deliberately, holding it high for the room to see. "You tried to erase me with this," I said. "But tonight it will become my signature." I pinned it to the podium right beneath the projected Forbes cover. My name above, their insult below. The contrast is permanent. Then I walked off the stage. Behind me, chaos. Investors shouting into phones, journalists sprinting toward exits, Victor raging incoherently. Ahead of me, silence except for the steady rhythm of my heels on marble each step, marking the end of his reign and the beginning of mine. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking out diminished. I was walking out crowned not by their applause but by my own proof. Victor had built his entire existence on performance. Armani suits, tailored to perfection deals, announced with champagne in hand. The polished smile of a man who had never been told no. But under the chandeliers of the Ritz-Carlton, that carefully curated image shattered like crystal drops from a great height. His jaw tightened, his knuckles bleached around the stem of a glass, eyes darting from screen to screen as phones buzzed with alerts. Investors barked orders into Bluetooth headsets. Dump everything. The market's tanking. A hedge fund partner cursed so loudly heads turned. The senator he had courted all year walked out with his aide, muttering about distancing before it spreads. I had watched Victor humiliate countless others with a smirk and a toast. Tonight the script reversed. Every denial he gave sounded thinner, more frantic. Every laugh was swallowed by murmurs of disbelief. And my mother, oh my mother. She sat poised in sequined perfection, but for once she didn't shield him. She leaned back, eyes, cold lips pressed into a line that looked more like calculation than sorrow. Her body shifted subtly away from him, like even proximity might taint her. The ballroom had transformed from a victory parade to a battlefield. On the big screen, the Bloomberg ticker scrolled mercilessly. Navarro Capital shares plummet. SEC probe confirmed. Minus 22%. Minus 25. The numbers bled red. Guests stared at their phones with ashen faces, watching fortunes evaporate in real time. Victor grabbed the microphone, voice breaking. "Don't believe her. This is all lies. She's unstable. She's jealous." He pointed at me like a desperate prosecutor, but the authority he once commanded was gone. His voice didn't fill the room. It cracked like glass. Someone in the back shouted, "Then why is Forbes confirming her net worth?" Laughter followed, sharp, brutal, merciless. It wasn't joy. It was blood in the water. That was when my mother finally spoke. Not in defense, but in condemnation. Her words cool as steel. "How could you be so careless?" The silence that followed cut deeper than any slap. Victor's eyes widened. He had expected her shield, not her blade. Our father, Luis Navarro, pounded the table, his voice ragged. "Do you realize what you've done? Our fortune, our name." But the power that once made senators flinch was gone. Guests only stared, watching the Navarro patriarch unravel like the dynasty itself. The fracture was public now. Whispers rippled. Bankruptcy filings, civil suits, inheritance disputes. The end of a family empire unfolding in real time. And then Damien stepped forward. calm, deliberate, unshaken. His voice rose steady above the chaos. I worked with Elena. She saved my company when Victor tried to crush it. She's the real Navarro legacy. It wasn't just words, it was a spark. One by one, others rose. A factory owner, she restructured my plant when no one else would touch it. A cafe owner, 200 jobs saved in Newark because of her. A retailer, she kept our doors open when the banks slammed theirs shut. Their voices carried more weight than Victor's frantic denials. They weren't theories. They were testimonies. Victor's mask cracked at last. The smirk twisted into rage. His eyes burned wild, and with a roar he lunged at me. Gasps sliced the room. Security surged forward, grappling him as his glass shattered on marble. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. And there he was, the golden heir of Navarro capital, thrashing under chandeliers like a common criminal. "Let me go. She's nothing, nothing." His voice was hoarse, broken, no longer commanding. The more he fought, the more pathetic he appeared, immortalized in hundreds of videos that would replay on every platform before the night ended. And then the final blow. His fiancée froze, diamond ring gleaming under the lights. Slowly, deliberately, she ripped it off her finger and hurled it at his chest. The diamond clattered across marble, a sound louder than any gavel. "I won't marry a fraud," she spat, and stormed out, heels striking the floor like a verdict. Whispers followed her into the hallway, a trail of scandal that would stain her less than staying by his side. Journalists didn't miss a beat. Tweets exploded. Navarro heir escorted out of Ritz-Carlton amid fraud probe. Navarro fall. Forbes revenge. Side-by-side clips already circulated, Victor's manic thrashing against my calm Forbes cover projected overhead. The contrast was too perfect to ignore. And through it all, I stood silent. I didn't gloat. I didn't sneer. I simply walked to the podium where the Housekeeper badge still clung bent slightly from the pin. I lifted it gently, slipped it into my clutch, and closed it with care. Not as a trophy, not as an insult, but as proof of the story rewritten in front of them all. When I stepped down, the crowd parted not in mockery but in quiet respect. Chairs scraped back, guests rising to their feet. Some nodded, others simply stared, but no one laughed. Not anymore. The marble floor carried the echo of my heels as I walked out of the Ritz-Carlton, leaving Victor's downfall behind me. Outside Manhattan was alive. Sirens screamed, skyscrapers lit like restless gods. The winter air sliced sharp against my skin, but it felt clean, free. Damien caught up, his voice low but steady. "This isn't just Victor's fall. The whole Navarro empire is cracking." I looked up at the skyline, unafraid. "Then let it burn," I whispered. "I've already built something stronger." By dawn, the Navarro empire was already in pieces. Navarro Capital's shares had been halted overnight, trading frozen pending the SEC probe. Headlines blared across Bloomberg, Reuters, and even morning talk shows, from Housekeeper to billionaire Elena exposes family fraud. My phone buzzed nonstop, investors begging for meetings, journalists demanding interviews, lawyers offering partnerships. Yet while the world saw scandal, I saw opportunity. The same ballroom where I'd been branded a housekeeper was now up for sale after the Ritz-Carlton's holding group quietly admitted bankruptcy. My brother's penthouse seized as collateral. My parents' estate in the Hamptons frozen under investigation for unpaid taxes. Everything they once used to measure superiority was crumbling. And I intended to buy it all, not as a trophy of revenge, but as a foundation for something different. A new empire not built on manipulation, but on resilience. The morning after the gala, the world couldn't get enough of the Navarro collapse. Hashtags dominated every feed, Housekeeper to billionaire Navarro fall Forbes revenge. News anchors replayed Victor's meltdown on loop, pausing to compare it with the polished Forbes cover where I stood in a navy suit, arms folded against Manhattan's skyline. I silenced the calls and ignored the endless interview requests. This wasn't the time for noise. It was the time for strategy. Simone, Damien, and I gathered in my Manhattan apartment, still more war room than home, with files stacked high and monitors glowing with real-time financial updates. Simone's tone was blunt. The SEC has frozen Victor's assets. Your complaint is airtight. His lawyers can thrash, but he's cornered. Damien spread documents across the table. And while his empire collapses, there's another opportunity. The Ritz-Carlton's holding group is offloading assets to cover debt, including the ballroom. I leaned forward, scanning the pages. The same marble hall where I had been branded a housekeeper, the same place where Victor's allies once sneered at me. Acquire it, I said. Through Nexus Holdings. We'll repurpose it. Damien smiled. Consider it done. That was only the first strike. By week's end, federal investigators had seized the Navarro estate in the Hamptons, our family's crown jewel. It went to auction, and through a proxy shell company, I bought it back. Walking through the echoing halls was surreal. I remembered dinners filled with mockery, the clink of crystal glasses as my mother praised Victor while pretending I was invisible. Now the rooms were silent, stripped of luxury, stripped of power. This place doesn't deserve to rot, I whispered. Instead of restoring it for myself, I decided on something bigger. I would transform it into a leadership academy for underprivileged women entrepreneurs. A space where young women dismissed as nothing could learn to build everything. When Forbes requested a follow-up interview, I accepted not for vanity but for purpose. Sitting in their glass studio, the skyline behind me, I spoke carefully. I know what it feels like to be excluded from the table, I said. So I won't just build bigger tables. I'll build whole new rooms where everyone has a seat. The article headlined Elena's New Empire from Revenge to Redemption. But this wasn't just about symbolism. It was about infrastructure. While Victor's fortune crumbled in frozen accounts and collapsing stock schemes, I redirected my capital into innovation. Nexus launched a decentralized finance initiative, DeFi, for small businesses, a platform that allowed family-owned shops to access loans without predatory bank rates. Unlike Victor's obsession with stock manipulation, I told my team we'll invest in transparency, real value, real people. Momentum followed quickly. At the next New York Business Gala, the same kind of event where I'd once been mocked, the reaction was different. Senators, CEOs, even old rivals stood as I entered the ballroom, my ballroom now since Nexus Holdings had finalized the acquisition. A senator raised his glass and declared my initiatives a blueprint for ethical capitalism. But the most powerful moment came privately after the applause. I walked to the new Nexus Holdings plaque mounted near the entrance of the Ritz ballroom. From my clutch, I took out the same paper badge I'd once been forced to wear, Housekeeper. With deliberate care, I pinned it to the plaque. It would stay there permanently, not as shame but as a reminder. Where I came from, what I survived, what I built. By the end of the night, as I prepared to leave, a journalist brushed past security and leaned in close. His whisper was sharp. Victor's lawyers are preparing a counterstrike. They won't go quietly. I smiled, faintly unshaken. Let them try, I said. I've already cleaned the house. For months, headlines had called me ruthless, a whistleblower, a billionaire who burned her family's empire to the ground. But the truth, I wasn't interested in ashes. I was building something that could last beyond me. Sitting in the quiet of the old Navarro mansion, now stripped of its gold curtains and crystal chandeliers, I imagined rows of young women seated in the dining hall where I'd once been mocked. Not debutantes in pearls, but entrepreneurs with notebooks, laptops, and hungry eyes. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was a legacy. My family had used wealth as a weapon. I would use mine as a shield, a ladder, a key. Because the greatest triumph isn't just proving your enemies wrong, it's proving the next generation deserves better. The Hamptons estate was no longer the Navarro Palace of gossip columns. It was now the Navarro Institute for Women in Business, a place where inherited privilege no longer mattered. The same mahogany dining table where I had once been denied a chair now held 30 laptops, each seat occupied by a woman who had fought her way here. Some were single mothers balancing textbooks with childcare. Others were immigrants whose parents still worked double shifts just to pay rent. At the first cohort's graduation, I stayed in the back of the room unnoticed while they presented their business pitches. A catering company designed to employ formerly incarcerated women. a Detroit-based bakery that used our microloan program to open a second location, a small fashion line that went viral on TikTok because its founder finally had capital to market her designs. Their applause wasn't for me, and that was the point. Across town, the ballroom that once humiliated me had been reborn. Nexus Hall now hosted citizenship ceremonies, charity dinners, and small business expos. I walked in one evening during a youth entrepreneurship showcase. A teenage girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered loud enough for me to hear, "That's the Forbes lady. If she could do it, maybe I can too." The weight I'd carried for years, the label, the shame, the relentless fight, lifted a little. My story was no longer just about revenge. It was becoming hope. At night, I still kept the badge in my office framed behind glass. Housekeeper. I'd trace its edges, sometimes remembering, not with anger anymore, but with clarity. "They tried to erase me," I wrote in my journal one evening. But that erasure gave me freedom to define myself. Meanwhile, our DeFi initiative grew beyond projections. A barbershop in Detroit used our microloan platform to expand into 3 locations. A Miami tech startup used it to keep engineers paid during a funding gap. Wall Street critics scoffed, calling it idealism dressed as finance. But the numbers proved otherwise. It was profitable, sustainable, and ethical. Even as my empire expanded, the old Navarro family tree withered. My mother Isabella lived quietly in a modest condo, her name absent from the social calendar. The friends who once flocked to her Hampton soirees now crossed the street to avoid her. My father Luis retreated into silence, barely leaving the house. And Victor's trial loomed. Investors had filed civil suits, and prosecutors lined up witnesses. Tabloids branded him the Poison Prince, a cautionary tale of greed and arrogance. Our legacy was power hoarded, I wrote in my notes after a board meeting. Mine will be power shared. The mansion's stone courtyard echoed with laughter one afternoon when Zoe arrived. My cousin, once complicit in family games, now transformed, hugged me tightly. She had finished her MBA, inspired by everything she'd witnessed during the fall. "I've launched an ethical venture capital fund," she told me, eyes bright. "We'll back founders who don't fit the Wall Street mold. Women, immigrants, people dismissed as outsiders. You showed me what a real family looks like, chosen, not inherited." Her words warmed me in a way Forbes covers never could. Late that night, I wandered the halls of the mansion alone. Past the empty chandeliers, past the echoing staircases, until I stood before the glass case holding the badge. My fingers brushed the cold surface. "This was never an insult," I whispered. "It was my beginning." My phone buzzed on the table behind me. A notification lit the screen. Victor's trial officially set for next week. I smiled to myself. The end was coming, and with it the final chapter of a legacy rewritten. 1 year later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching my brother stand trial. Victor, once the golden heir of our family, wore a wrinkled suit and hollow eyes. No Armani armor, no champagne confidence, just a man stripped of power waiting for the verdict. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Guilty on all counts: embezzlement, securities fraud, manipulation of shares. He would serve 12 years in prison. The room buzzed, but I felt only silence inside me. This wasn't a triumph. It wasn't even revenge anymore. It was justice, and it was necessary. For the first time, I realized the story wasn't about Victor's fall at all. It was about my rise and what I chose to do with it. The courtroom smelled of paper and sweat, the air too heavy for breathing. Prosecutors rolled out the evidence one piece at a time. Wire transfers disguised as consulting fees offshore. Accounts falsified valuations of stock. I remembered photographing those very documents at his desk while he laughed with champagne in hand. Now they were blown up on a projector screen condemning him. Witnesses testified. A hedge fund partner described how Victor manipulated quarterly reports. His former fiancée, once draped in diamonds, stood in pearls and bitterness, recounting how he pressured her to sign a prenup while hiding debts. Even his old assistant spoke, trembling about being ordered to shred files. When the verdict was read, Victor tried to meet my eyes. For years, those eyes had been filled with arrogance, the look of someone who thought inheritance made him untouchable. But today they were hollow. I didn't look away. I didn't glare. I just met his gaze with clarity, offering neither hate nor pity. He had destroyed himself. My mother sat rigid in the gallery, lips pressed so tight her lipstick cracked. She didn't look at me, didn't speak to anyone. My father slipped out before the sentencing was finished, his shoulders hunched under the weight of a dynasty collapsing. The Navarro Empire ended not with applause or fireworks, but with silence. Outside the courthouse, the swarm of journalists surged toward me. Microphones shoved forward, questions shouted. Elena, do you feel vindicated? Do you think this is revenge? I raised one hand not to silence them, but to steady my own breath. Justice isn't about bloodlines, I said. It's about accountability. That one line spread faster than any verdict. Within an hour, it was trending. Within a day, it was quoted on morning shows, printed across headlines, turned into a meme overlaid on my Forbes cover. But I wasn't thinking of cameras when I drove out to the Hamptons that evening. I was thinking of the women waiting at the Navarro Institute. The mansion had been transformed. No crystal chandeliers, no silver place settings, no seats withheld for humiliation. Now rows of young women sat around the long dining table, laptops open, notebooks scribbled full of ideas. I listened to their pitches: an eco-friendly fashion line, a food truck chain designed to employ veterans, a fintech app using DeFi to make microloans accessible to immigrant-owned businesses. When they looked at me, I told them the truth. This place exists because someone once told me I didn't belong at the table. Now I build tables with more chairs. Later, back in my Manhattan office, I stood before the framed badge. Housekeeper. Beside it, a newly delivered copy of Forbes, the second cover they had given me. The headline read, "From Revenge to Legacy. Elena redefines power." I placed it next to the badge. Two truths, side by side. My insult and my answer. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the skyline. They thought legacy was money, I whispered. But the true legacy is how many lives you touch when you finally hold the power they tried to keep from you. The trial was over. Victor's story ended in prison. Mine was still being written. If you've ever been dismissed, if you've ever been told you don't belong, remember this. Your place at the table is yours to build. Don't wait for their invitation. Make your own. And when you do, fill it with people who see your worth. That's the only revenge that lasts. Now I'll ask you, what would you have done if you were in my shoes that night at the luxury dinner? I want to hear your story, your fight, your moment of defiance. Because these stories don't end with me. They begin again.
Emergency, Mom's had a heart attack. My husband's voice cracked with panic as he gripped his phone. We need to go home now. I stared at the pristine waters of the Maldives beach, watching our dream vacation crumble before my eyes. My name is Alexandra, and after 5 years of nonstop work and saving every penny, my husband James and I have finally managed to book our dream getaway. We'd been here exactly 26 hours. What happened? I asked, already knowing who had made the emergency call. Linda, my mother-in-law, had spent the last month trying to sabotage this trip. Dad says she collapsed at home. James was already shoving things into our suitcase, his hands shaking. They're taking her to St. Mary's Hospital. Alex, we have to go. I took a deep breath, memories of the past 5 years flooding back. Every time James and I had planned something for ourselves, Linda had found a way to interfere. Our weekend trips mysteriously coincided with her emergencies. Our date nights were interrupted by her urgent needs for help with basic household tasks. But a heart attack? This was a new level even for her. Of course, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'll start packing while you book the flights. As James rushed to call the airlines, I looked at our hotel room, the overwater bungalow we dreamed about for years. The champagne we planned to drink at sunset sat unopened. The snorkel gear we'd rented for tomorrow's reef tour lay untouched. My phone buzzed with a message from my best friend Emma, who worked as a nurse at St. Mary's. Your MIL just walked into the ER demanding immediate attention. She's shouting about chest pains, but she drove herself here and seems energetic. I stared at the message, my suspicions confirmed. But how could I tell James? He was already in a panic, talking about cashing in our vacation insurance and paying whatever it took to get home immediately. Got us on the next flight, James announced, his face pale with worry. We leave in 3 hours. It's going to cost a fortune, but Mom needs us. I sat down on the bed, choosing my next words carefully. James, before we leave, I think we should call the hospital directly. He frowned. Dad already told us what's happening. We don't have time to. Please, I said firmly, just call the hospital. Ask about her condition. Maybe it was something in my tone, or maybe deep down he had his own doubts. But James picked up his phone. I watched as he dialed St. Mary's and asked about Linda Mitchell. The color drained from his face as he listened. What do you mean she's arguing with the triage nurse? I thought, Dad said she had a heart attack. I pulled out my phone and showed him Emma's message. James sat down heavily beside me, the realization hitting him hard. She's faking it, he whispered, more a statement than a question. She's actually faking a heart attack to bring us home. Before I could respond, another message from Emma popped up. You need to see this. I'm sending you security footage from the ER entrance. Your MIL parked in the ambulance bay, fixed her makeup, then stumbled in clutching her chest. The performance would be impressive if it wasn't so manipulative. The video loaded, and there she was, Linda, parking her Mercedes precisely between the lines, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror, and then transforming into a woman in desperate medical distress as soon as she opened the car door. James watched the footage in silence, his expression shifting from shock to anger. 5 years, he said finally. For 5 years, every time we tried to do something for ourselves, she's pulled something like this. But this is too far. I wrapped my arm around his shoulders, feeling his body tremble with a mix of emotions. I'm so sorry, James. No, he said, standing up suddenly. I'm the one who's sorry. Sorry I let her manipulate us for so long. Sorry I didn't see what she was doing. He picked up his phone again, but this time his hands were steady. I need to make 2 calls, one to cancel our emergency flights and one to tell my mother exactly what I think about her little performance. I watched as he stepped out onto our private deck, phone in hand. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. We hadn't lost our vacation after all, but something had shifted. For the first time in our marriage, James was truly seeing his mother's behavior for what it was. My phone buzzed again. Another update from Emma. Hospital security is getting involved. Your MIL is demanding to be admitted despite normal vitals and clear EKG. She keeps saying her son is flying home to be with her, and the hospital will be sorry if they discharge her before you arrive. I couldn't help but smile. Linda had finally overplayed her hand, and she had no idea what was coming. James's voice carried through the glass doors of our bungalow as he confronted his mother. I've seen the security footage, Mom. The hospital sent it to us. How could you do this? I could hear Linda's shrill protests even from where I sat. Security footage? That's private medical information. I'll sue them. I'm having a medical emergency, and you're abandoning me for some vacation. A medical emergency? James's voice grew harder than I'd ever heard it. The footage shows you parking your car, checking your makeup, and then pretending to collapse. The doctors say there's nothing wrong with you. Those doctors don't know anything. I raised you better than this, James. What kind of son chooses a beach over his dying mother? I watched as James gripped the balcony railing, his knuckles turning white. You're not dying, Mom. You're lying. Just like you lied about needing emergency plumbing repairs during our anniversary dinner. Just like you lied about falling down the stairs when we tried to go camping last summer. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Linda's voice came back, smaller but somehow more venomous. That girl has turned you against me. Alexandra never understood our family's closeness. She's always tried to come between us. Stop. James cut her off. Alex has put up with your manipulation for 5 years. She's never complained, never tried to come between us. But I see it now, Mom. I see everything. Emma sent another update. Your MIL just threw her phone at a nurse when they suggested she was having an anxiety attack rather than a heart attack. Security's been called again. I stepped out onto the deck, placing a gentle hand on James's shoulder. He leaned into my touch, still holding the phone. I'm done, Mom, he said firmly. We're staying on our vacation. If you actually have a medical emergency, the doctors at St. Mary's are more than capable of handling it. But this manipulation, these lies, they stop now. You'll regret this, Linda hissed. When something really happens to me, you'll wish you'd been a better son. No, Mom. The only thing I regret is not standing up to you sooner. Goodbye." He ended the call and turned to me, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I'm so sorry, Alex. I should have seen it years ago." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed with a message from his father. "Your mother's being escorted out of the hospital. She's hysterical. Please come home and help deal with this." James looked at the message, then at me, then at the beautiful sunset over the ocean. For a moment, I saw the old uncertainty cross his face, the ingrained response to rush to his mother's aid. "You know what?" he said, putting his phone on silent and placing it face down on the deck table. "Dad enabled her behavior just as much as I did. They can handle this themselves." Emma's updates kept coming. "Your MIL is now in the parking lot, telling anyone who'll listen that her son is abandoning her on her deathbed. Hospital security has informed her she'll be trespassing if she comes back without an actual emergency." I couldn't help but laugh, and after a moment, James joined in. The tension of the last few hours broke like a wave, leaving behind something lighter, cleaner. "Do you know what I want to do?" James asked, pulling me close. "I want to open that champagne we've been saving. I want to sit on this deck with my wife, watch the sunset, and start living our life without jumping at my mother's every call." "Are you sure?" I asked softly. "This is a big change." He kissed my forehead, his embrace steady and sure. "I've never been more sure of anything. Well, except marrying you." As we sat there, watching the sky turn from gold to purple, our phones kept buzzing with updates. Linda had called every family member, spinning a tale of abandonment and betrayal. James's father sent increasingly demanding messages. Even Linda's sister chimed in, berating James for his callousness. But for the first time in our marriage, we let the drama wash past us like the waves below our bungalow. James turned to me, his eyes clear and determined. "I think it's time we set some real boundaries," he said. "Not just for this vacation, but for our life together." I nodded, feeling a hope I hadn't dared to embrace in years. "What did you have in mind?" "First, no more emergency responses without verification. Second, we start making plans for our life. Real plans that don't revolve around my mother's latest crisis. And third," he smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes, "we turn off our phones and enjoy the rest of the sunset properly." As the last rays of sun painted the sky, I curled into James's embrace, feeling the warmth of more than just the tropical evening. Something had shifted, not just in our vacation, but in our marriage. Linda's latest manipulation hadn't ruined our trip. It had given us something far more valuable than a week in paradise. It had given us our freedom. The rest of our vacation was everything we dreamed of and more. Without Linda's constant interruptions, James and I rediscovered what it felt like to just be us. We snorkeled through coral reefs, had candlelit dinners on the beach, and spent long afternoons doing absolutely nothing but enjoying each other's company. But reality waited for us back home, and Linda wasn't done yet. When we landed at the airport, Emma was waiting for us with news. "Your MIL has been busy," she said, hugging me tight. "She's been at the hospital 3 more times, each time with a different emergency. They finally had to threaten her with legal action to make her stop." James just shook his head, no longer surprised by his mother's antics. "And Dad? How's he handling it?" "He's been calling everyone, trying to fix things," Emma replied. "But something interesting happened while you were gone. The hospital's patient advocacy team got involved after your MIL's performance. They're recommending she get psychological help." As we drove home, we found our house surrounded by family members' cars. Linda had apparently called an intervention. "Ready?" I asked James, seeing his jaw tighten. He squeezed my hand. "More than ready." Inside, Linda sat in our living room like a queen holding court, surrounded by concerned relatives. She'd been crying, her makeup strategically smeared for maximum effect. "My own son," she wailed when she saw us. "Look what she's done to him. He left his mother to die while he played on a beach." James's father stood up, his face stern. "Son, this has gone far enough. Your mother needs—" "No, Dad," James cut him off. "What Mom needs is professional help. We've all seen the hospital footage. We all know what really happened." Linda's sister gasped. "What hospital footage?" I pulled out my phone, playing the video Emma had sent. The room fell silent as they watched Linda parking perfectly, checking her makeup, then dramatically stumbling into the ER. That's not." Linda sputtered, but for once, she had no story ready. There's more, James said quietly. The hospital has documentation of every fake emergency you've created over the past 5 years. Every time you've tried to manipulate us, every lie you've told. They're recommending psychiatric evaluation. The room erupted in chaos. Linda burst into fresh tears. But this time, fewer people rushed to comfort her. Her sister, who had always taken her side, sat back with a thoughtful look on her face. "We're not doing this anymore," James announced, his voice carrying over the commotion. "Alex and I are setting boundaries. No more emergency calls without verification. No more dropping everything because mom feels lonely. And if you want to be part of our lives, you need to get help." Linda tried one last tactic. "After everything I've sacrificed for you, the only thing you've sacrificed," I finally spoke up, "is your relationship with your son. But you can still fix that, if you're willing to do the work." The silence that followed was heavy with possibility. James's father was the first to move, walking over to stand beside his son. "She's right," he said quietly. "Linda, this has to stop. I've already made an appointment with Dr. Carter. We're going to counseling together." Linda looked around the room, realizing for the first time that her audience was no longer automatically on her side. Her sister was nodding along with James's father. Even her closest allies were looking at her with new eyes. I just didn't want to lose you," she whispered to James. "Mom, you were losing me anyway," he replied gently. "Every manipulation, every lie, every ruined moment, they all pushed me further away. The only way to keep me in your life is to get help and start building honest relationships." 6 months later, our lives look very different. Linda started therapy, reluctantly at first, but gradually with more commitment. She still struggles with boundaries, but now there are consequences when she crosses them. We've had peaceful family dinners, uninterrupted date nights, and even a weekend getaway without a single emergency call. Last week, she did something that shocked us all. She apologized. Not a manipulative, self-pitying apology, but a real one, acknowledging the harm she caused and the work she still needs to do. "I was so afraid of being alone," she admitted during a family session. "I thought if I kept you close, kept you needing me, I'd never lose you. Instead, I was pushing you away." James and I still have the sunset photo from that evening in the Maldives framed in our living room. It reminds us of more than just a beautiful moment. It marks the day we finally broke free from the chains of manipulation and started living life on our own terms. Sometimes the best endings don't tie everything up perfectly. Linda is still working on herself, and we're still learning how to navigate our new boundaries. But now, when our phones ring, we don't feel that instant dread. We're no longer waiting for the next crisis, the next emergency, the next manipulation. We're just living our lives together, exactly as we should have been all along. "You're just a gold digger," Amanda sneered, standing in my kitchen with her designer purse clutched to her chest like a shield. "Everyone knows you trapped my brother with your innocent act. Now do us all a favor and leave." I continued washing the dishes, letting the warm water run over my hands as I tried to maintain my composure. After 5 years of marriage to James, you'd think his sister would have found a new target for her venom. But no, Amanda had made it her life's mission to prove I married her brother for his family's money. My name is Sofia Martinez, and at 32, I found myself defending my marriage yet again. Not against outside threats, but against the poison that seeped from within the family itself. James was away on a work trip, which meant Amanda felt emboldened to make her weekly visit to remind me how unworthy I was of the Anderson family name. "Are you even listening?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "James is filing for divorce. He knows all about your little scheme now." That made me pause. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands slowly, deliberately. "What scheme would that be, Amanda?" She smiled, the kind of smile that reminded me of a predator about to pounce. "The way you pretended to work at that coffee shop, making yourself look poor and helpless. How you orchestrated meeting James there, knowing he always stopped for his morning coffee. You played him perfectly, didn't you?" I couldn't help but laugh, which only seemed to infuriate her more. "I worked at that coffee shop to put myself through nursing school. Unlike some people, I'm not afraid of honest work." "Please," she scoffed, pulling out her phone. "I have proof now. Someone sent me interesting information about your past. Seems like you've tried this routine before, haven't you? Getting close to wealthy men, trying to sink your claws in." My heart skipped a beat, but not for the reasons Amanda assumed. I knew exactly who would have contacted her, and why. Let me guess, I said, keeping my voice steady. Someone named Marcus reached out to you. The slight widening of her eyes told me I was right. So you admit it. You know him. Oh, I know Marcus, I replied, walking toward the stairs. Would you like to see something interesting, Amanda? Since you're so concerned about the family's welfare. She followed me up to the attic, her heels clicking against the wooden steps like angry exclamation points. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dusty window, casting long shadows across the cluttered space. I moved purposefully toward an old trunk in the corner, one I hadn't opened since the day I married James. What are you doing? Amanda demanded, watching as I pulled out a key I kept on a chain around my neck. Showing you the truth, I said simply, unlocking the trunk. Since you're so interested in my past with Marcus. The hinges creaked as I lifted the lid, revealing stacks of yellowed newspapers, old photographs, and legal documents. On top lay a front-page article from 15 years ago. Its headlines still bold despite the passage of time. Tech mogul's son arrested in investment scandal. Amanda snatched the paper, her eyes scanning the text rapidly. I knew what she was reading. The story of how Marcus Reynolds, son of a wealthy tech executive, had been caught running an elaborate investment scam targeting young women. The article mentioned his arrest, but more importantly, it mentioned the key witness who had helped bring him down. A 19-year-old barista named Sophia Martinez. This can't be right, Amanda stammered, looking between me and the article. Marcus said you were his accomplice, that you helped him scam people. I pulled out more documents, police reports, court transcripts, and a letter of commendation from the FBI. I worked undercover with the FBI for 6 months to gather evidence against him. Marcus lost everything, his money, his freedom, his family's reputation. He spent 8 years in prison, and now he's trying to get revenge by poisoning my new life. Amanda sank onto an old chair, the paper trembling in her hands. But you were just a coffee shop worker. How did you? I was a criminal justice student working part-time, I corrected her. When I noticed Marcus's pattern with other young women who came into the shop, I contacted the authorities. They asked for my help building a case against him. I pulled out one final document, a certified letter from the FBI stating that the majority of Marcus's seized assets had been returned to his victims, thanks to my testimony. I could have taken the reward money they offered, could have sold my story to the press. But I didn't, because it was never about the money, Amanda. It was about doing what was right. The silence in the attic was heavy with the weight of shattered assumptions. Amanda stared at the evidence of my past, her carefully constructed narrative about me crumbling before her eyes. Does James know about all this? She finally asked, her voice small. No, I said quietly, because unlike some people, I don't think the past defines who we are. I married James because I love him, not because of his family's money or status. I've never needed either. I began placing the documents back in the trunk, each one a reminder of a chapter in my life I'd chosen to keep private, not out of shame, but because I'd wanted to build a new life based on who I was now, not who I'd been forced to become at 19. I think you should leave now, Amanda, I said, closing the trunk. And the next time Marcus or anyone else tries to feed you stories about me, remember what you saw today. Remember that appearances can be deceiving, just not in the way you always assumed. She stood up shakily, clutching her designer purse like a lifeline. As she headed toward the attic stairs, she paused. Why didn't you ever tell us? It would have changed everything. I smiled sadly. Would it? Or would you have just found another reason to doubt me? Some people only see what they want to see, Amanda. I learned that lesson a long time ago. As I watched her leave, I knew this wasn't over. The truth about my past was out now, and soon James would know everything. But for the first time in 5 years, I felt strangely peaceful. Sometimes the best defense isn't in hiding who you are, but in finally letting the truth come to light. I pulled out my phone and texted James a simple message. We need to talk when you get home. There's something I should have told you a long time ago. The house felt eerily quiet after Amanda left. I sat in the living room, surrounded by photo albums I'd pulled from the shelves. Pictures of James and me on our honeymoon, holiday gatherings with his family, moments of happiness I'd captured and preserved, hoping they'd somehow prove my worth to the Andersons. My phone buzzed with James' reply. Is everything okay? I can catch an earlier flight. Before I could respond, another message popped up. This one from an unknown number. My heart sank as I read it. Did you really think you could keep your past hidden forever, Sophia? I told you I'd make you pay for what you did to me. Marcus. I blocked the number immediately, but the damage was done. Marcus was clearly determined to destroy the life I'd built. The irony wasn't lost on me. He was still trying to control and manipulate, just like he had 15 years ago. The doorbell rang, making me jump. Through the peephole, I saw Margaret, my mother-in-law, standing there with Amanda. Of course, Amanda had gone straight to her mother with her discovery. I opened the door, steeling myself for what was coming. Margaret swept past me into the house, her expensive perfume trailing behind her like a warning sign. Amanda told me everything, she announced, turning to face me with the same cold expression I'd seen countless times at family dinners. About your involvement with that criminal, Marcus Reynolds. Did she tell you the whole story? I asked quietly. Or just the version Marcus wants you to believe? She showed me the newspaper articles, Margaret said, her voice sharp. My son married someone who was involved in a criminal investigation. Do you have any idea what this could do to our family's reputation? I walked to the attic stairs. Follow me. Both of you need to see something. This time, I pulled everything out of the trunk, not just the newspaper articles, but the commendation letters, the victim statements, the photos of young women who'd lost their savings to Marcus's scheme. I spread them across the attic floor, creating a timeline of truth that couldn't be denied. I was 19. I began, my voice steady. Working at the coffee shop, studying criminal justice. Marcus would come in, always targeting young women who seemed vulnerable. He charmed them, convinced them to invest their savings in his exclusive investment program. By the time I noticed the pattern, he'd already stolen from dozens of victims. Margaret picked up one of the victim statements, her eyes widening as she read the details of Marcus's manipulation tactics. The FBI asked for my help. I continued. I agreed to wear a wire, to let Marcus think I was another potential victim. For 6 months, I gathered evidence while watching him destroy more lives. When they finally arrested him, he looked me in the eye and swore he'd make me pay someday. But why didn't you tell us? Amanda asked, her earlier hostility replaced by something that almost looked like respect. Because I wanted a chance at a normal life, I replied. When I met James, it was 2 years after the trial. He was kind, genuine, everything Marcus had pretended to be. I fell in love with him because he saw me for who I was, not what I could offer him. Margaret sat down heavily on an old chair. All this time we thought. You thought I was a gold digger, I finished for her. Because it was easier to believe I had ulterior motives than to accept that maybe, just maybe, your son could love someone from a different background. Sophia? A voice called from downstairs, James's voice. My heart stopped. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. Heavy footsteps on the attic stairs, and then he was there, taking in the scene before him. His wife, mother, and sister surrounded by evidence of a past I'd kept hidden. I caught an earlier flight, he said, his eyes fixed on the newspaper article in his mother's hands. Amanda called me, told me there was something I needed to know about you. I stood up, my legs shaking slightly. I should have told you long ago, James. I'm sorry. He walked over, picking up the FBI commendation letter. His eyes scanned it quickly, then moved to the victim statements, the court documents, the photos. No one spoke as he pieced together the story of who I had been before I became his wife. Finally, he looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't expected. Pride. You helped put him away, he said softly. You risked your life to protect other women. Yes, I whispered. He turned to his mother and sister. All these years you've judged her, questioned her motives, made her feel like she wasn't good enough. And all this time she was more honorable than any of us. James, Margaret started, but he cut her off. No, Mom. You and Amanda owe Sophia an apology. Not just for today, but for every snide comment, every subtle dig, every moment you made her feel unwelcome in this family. I touched his arm gently. James, they didn't know. That's the point, he said firmly. They never tried to know you. They were so convinced they knew your type that they never bothered to learn who you really are. The attic fell silent again, but this time it felt different. The truth lay scattered around us in black and white, undeniable and transformative. Margaret stood up slowly, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. I think we owe you more than an apology, she said quietly. We owe you the chance to be truly part of this family. Amanda nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Sophia, for everything." I looked at them, these women who had made me doubt myself for 5 years, and felt something shift inside me. The past I tried so hard to hide had finally come to light, and instead of destroying my marriage, it had somehow made it stronger. James pulled me close, kissing the top of my head. "No more secrets," he murmured. "No more secrets," I agreed, feeling truly secure in his love for the first time since our wedding day. As Margaret and Amanda left, promising to help deal with any fallout from Marcus's attempts at revenge, I realized that sometimes the very things we try to hide become our greatest strengths when brought into the light. 2 weeks after the revelation in the attic, life had shifted in ways I never expected. The Anderson family dynamics had transformed. Margaret now called regularly, not to criticize but to genuinely check on me. Amanda had become an unexpected ally, using her legal connections to help protect me from Marcus's continued attempts at revenge. But Marcus wasn't finished. One morning, I arrived at the hospital where I worked as a nurse to find him waiting in the parking lot. He looked older than I remembered, prison time evident in the hardness of his face. "Hello, Sophia," he said, pushing off his expensive car, still playing the noble hero. I stood my ground, my hand already on my phone. "You need to leave, Marcus, now." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I lost everything because of you. My family's reputation, my future, all of it gone because you couldn't mind your own business. You lost everything because you stole from innocent women." I corrected him. "I just made sure you faced the consequences." He took a step closer. "And now you've built this perfect little life for yourself. The devoted nurse, the loving wife, the respected member of society. It would be a shame if something happened to ruin all that." "Step away from my wife." James's voice cut through the tension. He emerged from his car, walking purposefully toward us. Behind him, I saw Amanda's car pull up and 2 police officers I recognized from her law firm. Marcus's smug expression faltered. "This is a private conversation." "Nothing about this is private," Amanda said, joining us with the officers. "We've documented every attempt you've made to harass Sophia. Every call, every message, every threat." One of the officers stepped forward. "Mr. Reynolds, you're in violation of your parole by being here. You were explicitly forbidden from contacting Ms. Martinez or her family." I watched as they arrested him, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. James wrapped his arm around me, solid and supportive. "How did you know?" I asked him. "One of your coworkers saw him lurking earlier and called me," he explained. I reached out to Amanda immediately. Later that evening, the entire Anderson family gathered at our house. Margaret had insisted on a family dinner, saying we needed to do things properly from now on. As we sat around the dining table, I looked at these people who had once been my harshest critics. Margaret was sharing stories from James's childhood, actually including me in the conversation. Amanda was discussing how we could use my experience to help other women avoid similar scams. "I've been thinking," Margaret said, setting down her wine glass. "The family's charitable foundation could use someone with your insight, Sophia. Would you consider joining the board?" I nearly choked on my drink. The Anderson Family Foundation was Margaret's pride and joy, her way of maintaining the family's social standing. She had never even hinted at including me before. "Are you sure?" I asked carefully. "Of course she's sure," Amanda interjected. "Your experience with Marcus, your nursing background, you understand better than any of us how to actually help people." James squeezed my hand under the table. "What do you think, love?" I looked around at their expectant faces and felt tears well up in my eyes. "I'd be honored," I said softly. Margaret reached across the table and took my other hand. "No, Sophia. We're the ones who are honored. You've shown us what true strength and integrity look like. We were so busy judging you that we couldn't see the amazing woman my son was lucky enough to marry." That night, after everyone had left, James and I sat on our back porch looking at the stars. The same stars I used to look at 15 years ago, wondering if I was brave enough to stand up to Marcus. "You know what's funny?" I said, leaning against James's shoulder. "I spent so long trying to prove I was good enough for your family. But in the end, it was my past, the very thing I was trying to hide, that finally made them see me." James kissed my forehead. "They see you now. That's what matters." "Better late than never," I teased. "Much better," he agreed. though I always saw you from that very first coffee you served me. I smiled, remembering that day. You were the only customer who ever asked my name. Best question I ever asked, he said softly. As we sat there in comfortable silence, I thought about how life has a way of bringing things full circle. The past I tried to escape had become the bridge to my future. Marcus's attempt at revenge had only served to strengthen my bonds with the family I married into. Sometimes the very things we think will break us become the foundation of our strength. I learned that at 19, standing up to Marcus. I learned it again at 32, finally letting my truth come to light. The next morning, I would start my new role with the family foundation. But for now, I was content to sit under the stars with my husband, finally free from the weight of secrets and the need to prove myself. After all, the best revenge isn't in getting even. It's in living well, surrounded by people who love you for exactly who you are.